Things are ramping up across the Atlantic as we now have 3 areas of interest we need to pay attention to. But the big area that I am very closely paying attention to is the 2060 chance at the time of recording in the main development region. Models have continued to pick up on it and continue to increase the power numbers, and they've also shifted the models further and further and further to the west, to the point where if you are tuning in from the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, and even as far west as the Bahamas, you're going to want to start paying attention to it. And in this video, we're going to be going over everything that you need to know about this area of interest. Here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have 3 areas of interest that we want to go over here in the Atlantic. We have one in the subtropics that has been showing more and more signs of organization. We have one that is currently in the central MDR that is heading towards the Lesser Antilles. It is showing a few signs of more organized convection, but it has a very limited timetable in terms of its convective potential and in terms of if it could potentially develop or not. But the wave behind it is the one that we're mainly watching. That has a 2060 probability at the time of recording this video. That could change by the time you guys do see this based on what I am seeing with the organization and the increased convection in that region. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right into this. So here is what we have for you guys right here. This is the main boss that we're dealing with right here, and we have our 2 sideshows, at least for right now, that we're going to be dealing with as well. We're going to go ahead and start with the main man right here and then move forward to the west. So with that being said, here is our 2060 shot in terms of tropical development. Let's go ahead and read this out. An area of low pressure located a few hundred miles south of the Cabo Verde Islands is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms. As the system moves slowly westward, a tropical wave currently over West Africa is expected to merge with it in a couple of days. Environmental conditions are forecast to be more conducive for development by midweek, and a tropical depression could form during the latter part of this week while the system moves westward to west-northwestward across the central tropical Atlantic. 20% chance in the next 48 hours, 60% in the next 7 days. So that's what we are dealing with this, and at least in the long term, this could potentially be an impact and cause some problems for a lot of areas if you're in the Antilles, the Bahamas, or even in Puerto Rico as well. We have seen some model trends shifting further that way in the long run. We're going to want to watch that. Obviously, things are subject to change, but we will talk about that in just a second. But here is our 2 other areas of interest that I want to go ahead and go over first. A broad area of shower and thunderstorms associated with a tropical wave is located about midway between the coast of West Africa and the Lesser Antilles. Some gradual development of the system is possible through the midweek while it moves quickly westward across the central tropical Atlantic. Upper level winds are expected to become less favorable. There's more shear in the Caribbean graveyard for development later this week as the system approaches the Lesser Antilles. 10% chance in the next 48 hours and 7 days. Meanwhile, up here with our western subtropical Atlantic system over here, let's go ahead and talk about this. A trough of low pressure located a few hundred miles northwest of Bermuda is producing disorganized shower and thunderstorm activity. Some development of the system is possible during the next couple of days while it moves eastward well north of Bermuda across the western subtropical Atlantic. The system is forecast to reach cooler waters later this week, ending its chances for formation after Wednesday. 10% chance in the next 48 hours and 7 days. This was tagged last night right as we were going live on the Triple P show with our Triple P Plus edition with that. So definitely an interesting situation that we're going to want to keep an eye on. But with that being said, let's go ahead and shift over to satellite imagery again. So starting off, let's go ahead and go to the central Atlantic at this current point. This is their 1010 wave over here. You are seeing a little bit more organization, at least in terms of sustained convection, but it has a very limited time to get its act together. What it's doing right now is moistening up the atmosphere for this tropical wave behind it, which is showing more signs of organization, rotation, and convection. We'll talk about that in a second, but ultimately what I think is going to happen is I don't believe this system right here is going to be doing too much development. I do think it's going to reach the Lesser Antilles. I do think there could be some potential impacts with that if you're tuning in from areas like Barbados and the Windward Islands. You could potentially see some flash flooding with this. But the biggest impact this is going to leave behind is this is going to kind of act as your sacrificial wave. I know I was kind of memeing about it on Friday and on Weather Kingdom stream last night when I sent him that $5 dono. But this is going to be a sacrifice right here for our big area of interest that's currently moving through parts of the Atlantic over here. Let me go ahead and show you why. What you're seeing further to the west is dry air. What you're noticing with this tropical wave is with all the convection it's building up and all the convection it's firing off, you're seeing that this wave right here is producing more moisture for the environment, more moisture for the atmosphere. This is a similar situation to what happened with Hurricane Beryl back in 2024. Originally, it was expected to be moving through a somewhat dry air mass, and not too much was going to be going on, maybe a Category 1 hurricane at most, but then you had a tropical wave produce a massive burst of convection ahead of it across much of the Windward Islands that just ultimately moistened up the atmosphere by a pretty significant degree and allowed for much better conditions and a lot more moisture for Beryl to take advantage of, and we all know how that story ended. Am I going to sit here and say this is going to be another Beryl situation? No, it's currently August 10th. That happened in late June of 2024. Also, I want to look at more of the models in a little bit just to kind of emphasize what the potential power numbers with it could be. We'll keep an eye on it, but regardless, you're seeing more convection starting to fire off across this tropical wave. May not do too much in the short term, but in the long run, this is moistening up the atmosphere and allowing for more convection and for more moisture for this area of interest to take full advantage of. Let's talk about this AOI for you guys over here. What you're seeing, especially over the course of the last day or so, is much more convection, much more organization. Last night on the Triple P show, I was talking about how this could potentially either make or break, whether it would last throughout the night and then die off, or would it sustain itself throughout the day. And so far from what I have seen, this area of convection has pretty significantly sustained itself throughout the day today. I know it's going to be getting dark over there in the next, I'd say, 6 or so hours. In this part of the MDR, it's doing a good job of kind of maintaining itself throughout the day, and when nighttime comes, generally that's when more convection starts firing off in the tropics. So that's something we're going to want to pay attention to. But overall, looking a lot better organized today. I wouldn't be surprised if the NHC is issued a 3070 with this by the time this video does come out. So ultimately, I'm recording this. This is before the 2 p.m. advisory. I wouldn't be surprised if they put out a 3070 based on what I'm seeing. That said, this is going to be more of a long-term threat. You do have a tropical wave behind it going to be merging with it. Let's go ahead and show you that right here, and then we'll get to the models. So you have this tropical wave moving real quickly off the coast of Africa, still producing some decent convection over here as it's adjusting to its water-based convection. It's attaching to the ITCZ over here, but by and large, this is moving quicker. It's expected to merge with our area of interest a bit further to the west. That's going to give it some extra juice and some extra moisture in the long run. So ultimately, you have a scenario where the wave in front of this is your sacrifice that's going to pump up moisture, and the wave behind it is going to give it that extra energy. It might initially cause a little bit of disorganization. It depends on how this wave behind it kind of, if it does produce its own vorticity, or if it's just its own tropical wave that's kind of attaching to the ITCZ, it could cause limited disorganization, at least initially, but in the long run, it's absolutely going to help it, and the models are absolutely reflecting that as well. So here is our forecast models. We have the European ensembles pulled up. We'll go back to the next 24 hours because we have this area of interest that is currently hovering near the Cabo Verde Islands. We have our subtropical system over here that is moving further to the east as well. That's showing more signs of organization this morning as well. I saw some of the convection over there too. So this is what we got 24 hours out. Let's see what's going on the next 48 hours as well. You are seeing more of this starting to spread out. You're starting to see more of a signal really starting to ramp up as this area of interest continues to increase in terms of its signs of organization and development. Let's go to 72 hours out, so that's 3 days out. This would be by Wednesday night, ladies and gentlemen. things really start getting organized. You have the cell behind it starting to merge with it as well, so things start getting interesting. Thursday night is when you start seeing maybe tropical development, maybe the power numbers starting to go up with it as well. That's when I'd say you'd see more of that tropical development starting to get its act together. This does have a lot of time to work with, not just because of the fact that it's in the MDR and it has good conditions already, but the conditions ahead of it are actually looking better and better with each model run, and I will show you some of that in a second. But ultimately, you're starting to see the power starting to increase. You're starting to see a lot of the signal ramping up as well. This is when I'd say your tropical depression starts to ramp up in terms of what's going to happen. As we get to Friday night, you're starting to see some of the power increase as it heads further to the west, moves through relatively warm waters of the main development region as it starts heading towards the Lesser Antilles. We've seen before in the last day this system progressing from this going out to sea to potentially being a closer and closer threat to land. Particularly if you're in the Lesser Antilles, I would start keeping a close eye on this. It's still too early to determine what exactly the conditions are going to do, but ultimately we are going to want to start watching this, especially as we get towards Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and later parts of the week. Going to Saturday night now, things start getting interesting over here. What I will tell you is the power numbers, at least initially, as it's moving through the main development region, they remain relatively low. Maybe tropical storm strength, maybe mid to strong tropical storm strength is what I'm seeing, and that's what the European is also showing on the operational as well. But as time progresses, as we start heading towards the Atlantic Basin, you do have this belt of wind shear that was forecast to be over here. The European ensembles and the European operational has started to do this as well. That belt of wind shear actually collapses as this system starts to head towards that region. So we're going to want to take this very seriously because that's going to ramp up the power numbers, and we can start showing you that as well. Here is what we have 168 hours out. So this will be next Sunday night. You are noticing, though, also a bit of a split in the models. Half of the ensembles want this to move closer towards land, towards the Lesser Antilles. Half of the ensembles want this to stay out to sea. It's still uncertain. Things are subject to change, but you are seeing more models starting to head further to the west. That's the main point regardless. And you're seeing the power numbers, especially with the northern two-thirds of the ensembles, really starting to ramp up to potentially hurricane strength as it heads towards the Atlantic Basin. It's going to have plenty of warm water to do this as well. And then as we get to 216 hours out, so this will be next Tuesday night right here, you're seeing it starting to drift out to sea. You are seeing some ensembles impacting the Antilles, more so now than what you were seeing previously. But by and large, things are starting to get their act together, and you have those hurricane power numbers especially continuing to increase as well. And then as we get to 240 hours out, that only continues, and you're seeing more ensembles actually moving through parts of the Greater Antilles, north of the Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba, entering the Bahamas potentially, according to the European. Keep in mind, this is 10 days out. Things are subject to change. I'm just showing you what the models are showing me right here. That said, we need to cross-reference this with the rest of the ensembles and the operationals. So with that, let's pull up the European AI. Here is the European AI. They've even started to increase the power numbers with this as well, mainly keeping a bit further to the south as well, just out of curiosity. What's it looking like 5 days out? Yeah, their suite is a bit further to the south, which I will say that if it stays that far to the south and heads towards the northeastern Caribbean, it's going to be generally weaker than if it were to stay out of the Caribbean altogether or just impact the Leeward Islands and then move out into the Atlantic Basin. The reason being is because you still have that Caribbean wind shear graveyard that you're going to want to pay attention to over there. Yes, the belt of wind shear in the Atlantic Basin collapses, but that doesn't contribute and it doesn't extend into the Caribbean just yet. So that's kind of the main thing I'm wanting to emphasize and one thing I'm wanting to pay attention to. But you are seeing these models shifting further and further to the west. The power numbers have definitely increased with all of this. And you're even seeing some scenarios where the Antilles and the Bahamas could start seeing some impacts from this as well. At least in terms of track, this is giving more of an Aaron vibe from 2025 than it has previously. So we're going to want to watch out for that going forward. That's your European AI. What's the GFS showing? Similar situation, shifting further to the west. The power numbers on the GFS have definitely increased, not to the European standard, but definitely a few hurricane ensembles are definitely there as it starts heading towards the Atlantic basin. Let's go ahead and show you the Google DeepMind. Google DeepMind has been really aggressive, actually, not only increasing the power numbers, but it's actually shifting further to the west to the point where if you're in the Antilles, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas, you're going to want to pay attention to this, especially if this scenario holds right here, where it develops, stays through the MDR, moves through the Antilles and Puerto Rico, and then starts intensifying as it moves through the southwestern basin. That's going to cause pretty significant impacts. The Google DeepMind, from what I've seen, is generally your worst case scenario from all the models I have seen. And that is a very interesting scenario and a very concerning thing, especially from what I've seen 24 hours ago. Please do keep in mind, this is 10 days out. Things are subject to change. We'll keep you updated on it, but things are subject to change. Regardless, though, definitely giving me those Aaron vibes in regards to its track. Intensity, we don't even have a clue just yet, but here's what we also have for the GENC. They're increasing their ensembles, and they're increasing the scenarios where it actually moves further to the west towards the Antilles and Bahamas. We're going to want to keep an eye on this. This is probably a scenario where we go, okay, we're going to want to pay attention to this. We're actually going to want to take this a bit more seriously than what we normally would. Kind of like Aaron from last year, but except this is actually a scenario where, according to all these models that are shifting further and further and further to the west, particularly with the AI runs, this is potentially impacting land. You're going to want to take this very seriously, and we're going to want to keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Now to see how the operational models have responded. And from what I have seen, especially with the European, it's definitely catching up to the ensembles. Here's what we have going on. This is by the time we get to about Tuesday night right here. According to this, it starts organizing and developing. It takes its time to do that. It takes its time. By the time we get to this scenario, we're about 5 days out. This is Friday night, and the system just now starts to get its act together. And then from then on out, according to the Euro, it kind of remains an open and closed wave as it heads towards the Antilles. But by the time we get to next week, the European starts ramping up in terms of organization and development. And by the time we get to next week and it crossing the Atlantic basin, the power numbers definitely increase. You're looking at a pretty substantial tropical storm, at least compared to what we've seen in previous models. 1,003 millibar system, at least by the time we get to August 18th. Compared to what we've seen previously, where this was rather a tropical depression on the operational runs. So the operationals definitely are catching up to what the ensembles are showing. That's something we're going to want to pay attention to, especially as the 12Z suite today comes out, and especially as we get the 0Z suite for tomorrow to come out as well, to see if that trend continues. Let's pull up the GFS for you guys now. Here is the 0Z GFS. The GFS went from being the conservative model to being the aggressive model from what I've seen. The GFS operational at the 0Z has this developing and organizing really quickly, potentially becoming a strong tropical storm or weak hurricane while in the main development region. I personally do not think that's going to happen. I think it's being a little bit quick. This system, yes, it looks good right now, but it still has a long way to go to get its act together. Not to mention it has that tropical wave behind it that needs to kind of figure out what it's going to do with it as well. So ultimately, you have it kind of organizing and developing, then it starts running into some wind shear, and then it starts weakening a little bit as well. But as it gets towards the Atlantic basin, things start to get a little interesting. The GFS, at least in terms of the operational run, hasn't quite caught up to the ensembles in terms of the power numbers in the Atlantic basin. But in terms of what we're seeing in the MDR, they've exceeded the power numbers on parts of the ensembles over there. So definitely an interesting situation. That was the 0Z. The 12Z is starting to come out on the GFS. Let's go ahead and see what's going on with it as well. Okay, so what I'm seeing is generally not as aggressive as the 0Z. It's definitely taking more time to get its act together, heading further to the south and moving a bit closer to land, and then ultimately not happening too much right there. So that's definitely an interesting trend with the GFS. You're going back and forth a little bit with the GFS. It was being aggressive last night. Now it's being a bit more on the conservative side, going forward. Still going to want to pay attention to it. We'll keep you updated on it as time progresses. Now, here is the Canadian run. We have the 0Z and the 12Z. We'll show you both of them very quickly. 0Z definitely had the power starting to increase a little bit more, albeit it did have it a bit further to the south, heading towards the Antilles, heading towards the Leeward Islands, and potentially impacting those areas and Puerto Rico before moving out to the Atlantic Basin as a strong tropical storm, potentially weak hurricane scenario, before hitting the Turks and Caicos and moving out to sea as potentially a Category 1 hurricane. What's the 12Z showing? Let's go ahead and see what's going on with that. Here's the 12Z run right here, organizing, developing, still rather consistent, I will say, as it heads towards the Antilles. A bit more to the north, I will also emphasize as well. Gets up to that tropical storm strength as it approaches the Bahamas before moving out to sea, and still calling for that hurricane scenario as it moves through the Atlantic Basin. So ultimately, what I'm noticing with this is your power potential increases as we get closer to the Atlantic Basin. If this system develops, I do not necessarily expect hurricane strength in the main development region, primarily because it still needs to get its act together, and it still has to battle a little bit of wind shear before that belt collapses in parts of the Atlantic Basin. But in the Atlantic Basin, things look a little bit better for tropical development and for strengthening as well. And then from that point on, we'll have to see what happens, considering it's that far out. We're looking at 8 to 10 days out by the time the system crosses and starts tapping into that power potential as it moves through the Atlantic Basin. Let's look at the Icon run. Here's the 12Z Icon, organizing, doing its best to get its act together. It actually gets up to tropical storm strength in the next 60 hours, which I do think is kind of interesting. And then as it starts moving, it actually gets to a strong tropical storm as it heads through parts of the main development region, similar to what the 0Z GFS, was saying at that current point. But then it starts to weaken due to some wind shear that moves through, and then it's kind of fizzles out as it heads towards the MDR. So you're still seeing a little bit of a split in the models. We're in general agreement that development is going to happen, but the main question is what is the ceiling going to be for this, and how could this potentially impact people that are in the Antilles and in parts of the Bahamas as well? We are still seeing quite a bit of that uncertainty that we were looking at earlier, and it's something we will continue to pay attention to. I also want to take a quick gander at our conditions as well, particularly our wind shear and particularly our dry air aspect of this, because yes, all the models look a little bit more concerning now than they did yesterday, but what is the wind shear and what is the dry air especially looking like? Because yes, the water is warm. We've already went over that. We're looking at 27 degrees Celsius all the way through until it gets to the Atlantic Basin, where it warms up to 29 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, part of the reason we're tapping into more of that power potential. But what are the other conditions looking like? And for that, we are pulling up our Trusty Dusty European. We have the Trusty Dusty European operational. I'll also show you the European Ensemble Shear as well, just to kind of see what the difference is with that. But here is our bulk shear for you guys. Ultimately, where this system's at, there is little shear that is impacting this at this current point in time. It's going to continue like this for the next few days. You do have a little bit of wind shear starting to ramp up a bit further into the southern part of the MDR, diving a bit further to the south, but this system's still organizing, still developing, and a lot of this wind shear actually gets pushed further to the west, and it kind of develops that belt-like structure I was talking about earlier, where you have the system potentially running into that wind shear as you get closer towards the Lesser Antilles. This is 5 days out. You have wind shear that's kind of moving at an angle, as a matter of fact. So initially, what I'm thinking right here is based on what I'm seeing, at least with the trough angle that I am noticing with how this system's progressing and perpetrating, what you're looking at potentially is maybe if this system gets its act together early enough, you see a scenario where this just enhances the outflow, allows for quicker organization and more power potential in the parts of the MDR. I think that's what the 0Z GFS and the 12Z Icon were kind of illustrating in particular, along with the Canadian run as well. This potential right here. But as time progresses, it starts running into that wind shear. But watch what happens as this starts moving into the Atlantic Basin. That wind shear belt, according to the European, collapses. Now, the European operational does have an upper level low that's currently moving through parts of the Atlantic basin over here. The European ensembles don't show it as egregiously, so it's kind of a bit of a discrepancy that we're going to want to pay attention to. But by and large, this belt collapses, and from that point on, with the exception of this upper level low that we're going to want to pay attention to, much better conditions for tropical development. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and go to the European ensemble suite right here. This is our belt for right here across much of the main development region and the Caribbean. Watch what happens in the span of a few days or so. Let's go ahead and go back to the 0Z and show you what's going on. We talked about this on the Triple P show. Look what happens. That wind shear belt collapses. Yes, you still have a bit of an upper level low over here, but it's not as expansive as what we saw on the European operational. The European ensembles very, very concerningly have that wind shear belt just collapsing as the system starts moving into the Atlantic basin. This is something we're going to want to pay attention to. It is a little bit of a discrepancy that we're also going to want to monitor as well. But ultimately, the wind shear, at least initially and towards the end of the runs, looks much better than what we were thinking about for tropical development. That's just one piece of the puzzle. What is our dry air aspect looking like? And we can pull that up. Here is our relative humidity. This is probably the easiest way to kind of show you what's going on at this current point. Here's the scenario with the dry air aspect that we got. So dry air, what we're looking at for right now, where this system is, where this tropical wave is embedded, is in this moisture pocket over here south of the Cabo Verde Islands, southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands by the time we're 36 hours out over here. And you are seeing more convection and more moisture being injected into this part of the main development region from our 1010 area of interest as well. That's going to increase the moisture. That's only going to increase the environment going forward. Yes, you do have Sahara air layer in parts of the MDR, but a lot of the dry air that I'm noticing, especially in this part of the MDR, is more mixable than what you were thinking a bit further up to the north. So we're going to want to keep an eye on it and pay attention to it. And another thing is, watch how this back wave over here impacts it as well. Watch what happens. You have a much more consolidated moisture pocket, and that's also why I said this is going to be helpful for tropical development, why it's going to give it more of an injection of moisture, because you have the wave in front of it producing moisture, you have the wave behind of it bringing a much more consolidated moisture pocket for the system to get its act together, to the point where by the time we're 5 days out, you have a pretty consolidated moisture pocket where, as long as the system produces convection and stays out of the wind shear, you're going to have a good time for this system to develop across parts of the MDR. Yes, you do have some dry air to the north, but as long as the wind shear remains relatively low, it should not initially cause any problems. But as it starts moving into the western MDR, it starts running into this wind shear belt. It's also going to be running into some dry air. So maybe a dry air entrainment could be possible until that wind shear starts breaking off. Then you have a situation where maybe this starts fighting off the dry air, from what I've seen. So you're going to want to pay attention to it, and especially how the convection starts responding when it moves through that wind shear situation, and how that starts battling the dry air, because yes, there is a lot of dry air over there, but if it can keep pumping out convection and it can keep mixing out a lot of that dry air, it's not going to have too many problems in terms of potentially tapping into those more strong tropical storm or hurricane scenarios over there. It's a very evolving and fluid situation we're going to want to watch out for. The ensembles have been the ones that have mainly been more and more often showing a lot more of these big power scenarios, where the operational runs are just now starting to catch up. So this is more of a fluid situation, primarily because it's still so far out and we still have a lot of time to figure out what's going on. And this system also, mind you, also has a lot of time to get its act together as well. And that's all things we're going to want to watch out for, and we're going to continue to keep you updated on here at the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close this video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Feel free to join the Storms United Discord server as well. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.